Rain fell in sheets, each drop a cold needle against Elias Thorne's neck as he limped through the skeletal remains of Outpost Kale 4. The colony had been dead for weeks. Rykar plasma cannons had seen to that, but the storm refused to let the place rest. Mud sucked at his boots, and the wind carried the sour stink of charred insulation and wet ash. Somewhere behind him, the twisted hull of his dropship smoked like a broken promise. Ahead, only darkness and the jagged silhouettes of collapsed habdomes. He was supposed to be dead with the rest of 3rd Platoon. Instead he was alive, bleeding from a shrapnel kiss along his left thigh, and hunting for anything that might keep him that way another day. Ammo, morphine, a working radio. The mission no longer mattered. Survival had narrowed to the next breath, the next step. A thin, reedy sound cut through the drumming rain. Elias froze. The cry came again, small, desperate, unmistakably alive. Not human. Higher, almost feline, yet laced with something that clawed straight into his chest. He adjusted the grip on his rifle and followed it. The nursery wing had taken a direct hit. Ferrocrete slabs lay like broken teeth, exposing colorful murals now blistered and peeling. He stepped over a toppled crib, its safety field long dead, and swept his flashlight across the ruin. The beam caught 3 tiny shapes huddled beneath an overturned changing table, pressed together for warmth. Hybrid cubs. 2 golden, 1 silver. Barely 8 weeks old if he had to guess. Their fur was soaked, matted with dust and blood that wasn't theirs. Triangular ears lay flat against narrow skulls. Stubby tails twitched in distress. The golden pair mewled again, a heartbreaking duet, while the silver one stared at him with eyes the pale blue of glacier ice, eyes far too aware for something so small. Elias had seen Lyran young before, pureblood and hybrid both, in refugee camps and propaganda vids. These 3 carried the unmistakable stamp, elongated canines just poking through pink gums, retractable claws already sharp enough to shred the emergency blanket someone had once wrapped them in. Someone who was almost certainly dead now. He should leave them. 3 mouths on a planet with no supply lines was suicide. He had maybe 4 days of rations, no medkit worth the name, and a leg that would buckle the moment adrenaline faded. Common sense screamed at him to keep moving. The silver cub lifted its head and gave a cracked, trembling chirp that sounded disturbingly like cold. Elias swore under his breath, the word lost to the storm. He slung his rifle, shrugged out of his field jacket, and knelt. The cubs flinched but didn't run. They had nowhere to go. Carefully, as though they might shatter, he gathered them against his chest. They weighed almost nothing, yet the warmth of their small bodies burned through his undershirt like brands. "Easy," he muttered, voice rough from disuse. "I've got you." The golden female, her left ear tipped with black, burrowed into the hollow of his throat and began to purr, a fragile vibration that rattled his ribs. Her sister licked a bead of rainwater from his collarbone, tiny tongue rasping like sandpaper. The silver male simply stared, unblinking, as if measuring whether this scarred, mud-covered human was salvation or simply a slower death. Elias tucked them inside the jacket, zipping it halfway so only their heads poked out like mismatched flowers. He pulled a ration bar from his belt, broke it into paste with a splash of water from his canteen, and offered it on shaking fingers. 3 pink noses sniffed, then tiny mouths latched on with surprising ferocity. They ate as though starvation were a living enemy snapping at their heels. They needed names. Calling them, the cubs, felt wrong, like calling a child it. "You," he told the bold golden one currently trying to climb his neck, "are Syrah." The quieter sister, who watched everything with solemn amber eyes, became Lyra. The silver male accepted a last smear of paste, then licked Elias's thumb clean with deliberate care. "And your Kale," Elias decided, voice softer than he intended. "Because this hellhole doesn't get to name you." Thunder rolled overhead, close enough to rattle his teeth. Somewhere in the distance, Rykar scavengers would be combing the wreckage for tech and prisoners. He needed to move. Elias rose, biting back a groan as his wounded leg protested. The cubs, his cubs now, whether the galaxy agreed or not, curled tighter against his chest, trusting him with a completeness that felt both miraculous and terrifying. Their combined weight was nothing, yet it anchored him more surely than any order ever had. He limped into the storm, one arm cradling the bundle, the other hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Behind him, the ruins of Kale, 4 faded into the rain. Ahead lay a hidden ravine and, if the gods still had a sense of humor, the half-functional scout ship he'd stashed there 3 days ago. Over the roar of wind and water, Elias spoke to the small lives trembling against his heart. "Listen up," he said, rain streaming down his face. "Nobody's leaving you behind again. Not while I'm breathing." The silver cub, Kale, reached up with one tiny paw and hooked claws gently into the stubble along Elias's jaw, anchoring himself. A promise or maybe a claim? Elias smiled, small and fierce, and lengthened his stride. The storm swallowed them both, man and cubs, walking out of the grave together. 3 months had turned the ruined nursery into a half-remembered nightmare and the 3 shivering scraps into chaos incarnate. Elias Thorne's cabin sat on the shoulder of Haven 9's tallest ridge, where the wind never quite stopped arguing with the pines. Inside, the single room smelled of wood smoke, spilled milk, and the faint ozone tang that followed the cubs everywhere. The furniture had surrendered weeks ago, couch shredded to ribbons, table legs scarred by climbing claws, one curtain now permanently knotted into a hammock for midnight acrobatics. Morning light slanted through the cracked window and painted stripes across the floorboards. Elias leaned in the doorway, arms folded, watching the daily ritual of destruction unfold. Syrah, golden, reckless, born trouble, balanced on the back of the battered sofa, tail lashing for balance, preparing to launch at the drone that delivered yesterday's groceries. Lyra, golden, thoughtful, already a schemer, crouched beneath the table, amber eyes tracking her sister's every twitch. Kale, silver, quiet, terrifyingly clever, sat cross-legged on the counter, tail curled neatly around his paws, calmly unscrewing the lid of Elias's last jar of real coffee with the patience of a bomb tech. "Absolutely not," Elias said. 3 heads swiveled. 3 pairs of ears pricked. 6 eyes widened in identical expressions of wounded innocence that wouldn't have fooled a blind man. Kale placed the lid on the counter with deliberate care, then chirped a single liquid note that somehow conveyed, "Who, me?" The drone buzzed through the open window. Syrah pounced. The impact sent both drone and cub tumbling across the floor in a tangle of fur and rotor blades. Lyra darted out, snatched the fallen grocery bag, and vanished behind the wood stove with a triumphant trill. Kale simply leapt from counter to Elias's shoulder, wrapped his tail around the man's neck like a scarf, and began to purr at a frequency that made Elias's teeth itch. He sighed, the sound half exhaustion, half surrender. "You 3 are going to get me evicted from the entire planet." Syrah extricated herself from the drone, miraculously unbroken, and bounded over, planting both forepaws on his knee. "Papa, hungry." "You're always hungry." He ruffled the black tuft on her ear. "You ate 2 entire trout an hour ago." "Growing," she declared, as though the word explained every sin. They were growing. Terrifyingly fast. At 5 months they already reached his waist, all long limbs and velvet fur and sharp, sharp teeth. Their voices had settled into a strange music, trade words shaped by Lyran throats, vowels stretched, consonants clicked like claws on stone. When they spoke to each other it was a liquid rush of purrs and churs that Elias only half understood, yet every time he caught his own name woven into it, something warm unfolded behind his ribs. He set Kale on the floor and limped to the stove, legs still stiff on cold mornings, to heat milk. The cubs trailed him like ducklings with murder mittens. Dr. Marachin arrived at noon, same as every second Tuesday, her battered skimmer kicking up gravel. She took one look at the fresh claw gouges in the doorframe and shook her head. "You're insane, Eli." "Morning to you too, document." Mara had been the colony's only veterinarian before the war turned her into a trauma surgeon for anything with a pulse. She carried her black bag like a priest carried scripture and regarded the cubs with the wary respect of someone who had seen what Lyran claws could do to battle armor. They submitted to her exam with varying grace. Syrah fidgeted and tried to chew the stethoscope. Lyra watched every movement, memorizing. Kale endured it motionlessly, only the slow lash of his tail betraying impatience. When Mara shone a light into Kale's eyes, the silver cub met her gaze without blinking. For a heartbeat the room felt colder. "Eli," she said quietly, "those markings on their foreheads, the ones that only show when they're upset or excited, they're royal crests. Not just noble. Royal." He kept his voice level. "Lots of Lyrans have pretty patterns. Not like these." She tapped her scanner against her palm. The Queen Regent's litter was stolen 6 months ago. Every bounty net in the sector has their genetic signature flagged. If anyone runs a deep scan, nobody's running anything. We're 2 days' flight from the nearest port and the only traffic is or haulers. He busied himself pouring milk into 3 mismatched bowls. "They're just kids." "They're heirs," Mara corrected. "And you're the human who stole them." "I didn't steal anybody. I found them. In a war zone. Alone. With royal genome locks still cycling in their blood." She exhaled through her teeth. "When the Lyrans come, and they will come, they won't ask nicely." That night Elias sat on the porch long after the cubs finally crashed in a heap of limbs and tails across his bed. Stars crowded the sky like thrown diamonds. He nursed a mug of something that almost passed for coffee and listened to the wind move through the trees. Inside, Kale's purr rumbled through the walls, deep, steady, powerful enough to vibrate the floorboards. The sound wrapped around Elias like armor. He thought about running. He'd mapped 6 bolt holes, cached supplies, false IDs. He could vanish with the cubs before first snow. But they had never seen snow. Never chased real butterflies. Never known a day without fear of strangers. A soft weight settled against his thigh. Lyra, awake despite the hour, pressed her forehead to his knee the way Lyran Young asked for comfort. Without thinking he slid a hand into her rough, thumb tracing the faint swirl of darker gold that would one day blaze into a crown. "Papa," she whispered. "Bad dream." "No dream, kid." He pulled her into his lap. She weighed as much as a 10-year-old human now and still fit perfectly. "Just thinking." "About leaving?" The question speared him. She was too perceptive by half. "Maybe," he admitted. She was quiet a long time. Then, "Home smells like you. If we leave, home leaves too." Elias closed his eyes. Somewhere in the dark, a beacon, one he thought he'd killed, pulsed once against his sensor net before he crushed it again. The signal was getting stronger. He held Lyra tighter. Inside, Syrah yowled in her sleep, chasing imaginary prey. Kale's purr deepened, soothing her without waking. The sound rolled through the cabin like distant thunder, like a promise, like a warning. Elias rested his chin atop Lyra's head and stared at the stars until they blurred. Let them come, he thought. Let the whole damn pride come. They would have to go through him first. The Lyran battlecruiser Starclaw slid out of hyperspace like a blade drawn from silk. On its bridge, Queen Regent Ashavel stood motionless, clawed fingers curled over the rail until the metal groaned. 6 months of silence had carved new hollows beneath her eyes, and the golden fur along her throat had lost its luster. Every night she woke reaching for cubs who were not there, feeling phantom heartbeats through a bond that refused to die. Today the bond flared, brief, fierce, achingly familiar, then vanished again. "Trace it," she said, voice low enough to scrape bone. Her claw guard commander bowed. "Haven 9, Outer Ridge. The signal is being deliberately jammed, but the signature matches." Ashavel closed her eyes. Joy and terror tasted identical on her tongue. On the planet below, Elias felt the sky change. He was splitting wood when the hairs on his arms lifted. The cubs, now the size of human 9-year-olds and growing faster every week, froze mid-wrestle on the porch. Syrah's ears flattened. Lyra's tail bottled. Kale rose slowly, head tilted toward the heavens as though listening to music only he could hear. "Papa," Kale said, the single word vibrating with something ancient. "Mother is coming." Elias's axe slipped from numb fingers. He had prayed the boy was too young to remember that word in that tone. He herded them inside, shut the heavy storm shutters, and killed every light. The cubs obeyed without protest, a silence more frightening than any tantrum. In the dark he loaded magazines by feel, checked the choke on the shotgun, and laid out the small arms he had sworn never to need again. Syrah pressed against his side, trembling. "Will she take us?" "I don't know, kid." His voice came out rough. "But nobody takes you anywhere without asking me first." Lyra climbed onto the table, ears swiveling. "They are already here," she whispered. "In orbit. I can taste them." Elias felt the bond now too, an alien pressure at the base of his skull, like a second heartbeat trying to sync with his own. It was growing stronger by the minute, threading through the cubs and reaching for something vast and regal and very, very angry. He moved to the window and parted the slats a finger's breadth. The afternoon sky was still clear, but the wind had died, as though the planet itself held its breath. In town, 30 kilometers down the valley, a dusty notice board flickered to life. A new bounty replaced the old grain prices. 3 grainy images, Syrah mid-pounce, Lyra staring solemnly at the camera, Kale with his unsettling ice-blue gaze. Beneath them, crimson Lyran script and stark trade letters. Property of the Lyran crown. Return alive preferred. Reward, 40 million credits. Dead, 5 million. Old Mrs. Halvorsen at the feed store stared up at the board, mouth working soundlessly. She had seen those cubs once, riding on a quiet human's shoulders, laughing like any children. She reached for her comm with shaking fingers. Elias never saw the notice. He was too busy watching the first contrail scar the western sky, black against gold, descending fast. The cubs clustered around him, small claws hooked into his pants. Their breathing came quick and shallow, but none of them cried. They had learned early that tears drew predators. "Listen," he said, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "Whatever happens, you stay together. You stay behind me. Understand?" Syrah's ears twitched forward. "We fight. If we have to." Kale's tail curled around Elias's wrist like a bracelet. "We are not afraid," the boy said, and the room temperature dropped 5 degrees. Frost feathered across the window glass from the inside. Elias felt the bond spike again, a lance of pure maternal desperation so sharp it brought him to one knee. Somewhere high above, Ashavel had felt her children answer. He stood, racked the shotgun, and opened the cabin door. Night was falling fast, bleeding violet across the ridge. The first drop pod burned through the clouds like a falling star, silent until the last second, when retro thrusters roared and turned the forest crimson. A second followed. A third. Elias stepped onto the porch, weapon loose in his hands. The cubs lined up behind him, Syrah on his left, Lyra on his right, Kale a pace back and centered. Their silhouettes against the cabin's glow looked suddenly, terrifyingly royal. Wind rose, carrying the scent of hot ceramite and distant ozone. Elias thumbed the safety off. Far above, Ashavel watched the same porch through the eyes of her forward spotter and felt her heart tear in 2 directions at once. On the ground, 4 figures waited beneath a sky full of fire. The first pod hit the Feline half a kilometer away. The shockwave rattled windows and sent pine needles raining like green snow. Elias did not flinch. He looked down at the 3 small, fierce faces turned up to his and spoke the only truth that still mattered. "Remember," he said, "you are mine until you tell me otherwise." Then the forest exploded with armored Lyran warriors, and there was no more time for words. The first Lyran to breach the clearing died without a sound. Elias's shotgun spoke once, a flat thundercrack that flung the armored figure backward into the pines. The second and third learned caution. They split, circled, and opened fire. Plasma bolts seared the night, turning rain into hissing steam and pine trunks into torches. Elias dropped behind the water barrel, reloaded by feel, and counted heartbeats. 12 warriors. Elite claw guard. He had expected mercenaries, not the Queen's own. Inside the cabin the cubs waited exactly where he had told them, low, behind the reinforced hearth, claws out. He felt their fear through the strange half-bond that had grown between them, sharp as broken glass, but beneath it ran something fiercer, trust. A grenade arced overhead. Elias shot it out of the air. The blast showered the porch roof with burning phosphorus. Shingles flared. He rolled clear as the overhang collapsed in a roar of sparks. Syrah's voice rose in a piercing yowl that was not sound alone. Suddenly 3 identical golden cubs sprinted across the yard in different directions. 2 of the claw guard hesitated, visors flicking between phantoms. Elias used the distraction to put 2 slugs into the nearer warrior's knee joint. Syrah might cracked, the Lyran went down screaming. Lyra's turn came next. She stepped into the doorway, small silhouette haloed by fire, and screamed. Not a child's scream. A sonic lance that punched the air like a railgun. 3 visors spiderwebbed at once. Blood streamed from ruptured ear slits. The warriors staggered, clawing at helmets. Kale never made a sound. He simply looked at the nearest plasma rifle. Frost raced along the barrel, flash freezing the power cell. The weapon exploded in its owner's gauntlets, taking both hands at the wrists. Elias felt the temperature plummet 10 degrees in a heartbeat. His breath fogged. The clearing glittered with sudden hoarfrost. The claw guard commander roared an order. The remaining 7 fanned into a half-moon, rifles leveled. Elias rose slowly, shotgun hanging loose at his side, blood running from a graze along his ribs that burned like molten wire. "Stand down," the commander barked in accented trade. "By order of Queen Regent Ashavel, surrender the royal cubs." Elias spat blood into the mud. "They have names." A soft whine cut the night, royal shuttle thrusters, descending straight down through the smoke. Searchlights speared the clearing, pinning everyone in white glare. The ramp lowered before the skids touched earth. She stepped out alone. Ashavel wore no armor, only a sleeveless coat of midnight silk that whipped around her calves. The golden fur of her throat and forearms gleamed like molten metal. The royal crest blazed between her eyes in living light. Every Lyran in the clearing dropped to one knee, heads bowed. The cubs felt her and whimpered. Elias felt it too, a tidal pull behind his sternum that nearly buckled his knees. Ashavel walked forward unarmed, rain sizzling where it touched her fur. 10 meters. She stopped an arm's length away and sank slowly to her knees in the mud, pride and desperation warring across her face. "My children," she said in Lyran, voice breaking on the word. Syrah hissed and pressed harder against Elias's leg. Lyra's ears lay flat. Only Kale took one hesitant step forward, then another, until he stood between the queen and the man who had carried him out of hell. Ashavel extended trembling fingers. "Kale Fairy, come to me." The silver cub looked back at Elias. The question was plain. Elias's throat worked. The shotgun felt suddenly heavier than a planet. "Your choice, son." Kale turned again. Slowly, deliberately, he walked to his birth mother and placed one small paw in her hand. Ashavel's breath hitched. Tears cut clean paths through the soot on her cheeks. But when she tried to draw him close, Kale resisted, glancing again at Elias. Syrah and Lyra broke then. They bolted across the mud and flung themselves against Elias's legs with small, terrified cries of, "Papa!" The queen's ears flicked back. Pain flashed across her face like a blade. Elias knelt, ignoring the fire in his ribs, and gathered all 3 cubs against his chest. Their claws pricked through his shirt, anchoring. He looked up at Ashavel over their heads. "They don't know you," he said quietly. "You weren't there when the bombs fell. You didn't feel them starve. You didn't hold them while they screamed for a mother who never came." Ashavel's voice came out raw. "I searched every day. I felt them, alive, afraid, and I could not reach them. Do you think I wanted this?" "I think," Elias said, "that wanting isn't the same as being there." Silence stretched, broken only by rain hissing on embers. The claw guard commander shifted, uncertain. Ashavel lifted one hand. Every warrior froze. She looked at the cubs, really looked. Saw the way Syrah's tail curled around Elias's wrist like a bracelet, the way Lyra's ears swiveled toward his voice alone, the way Kale stood half in her shadow and half in his. Something ancient and Lyran shifted behind her eyes. "Lower your weapons," she ordered. The commander hesitated. "My queen." "Now." Rifles dropped as one. Ashavel rose. Mud streaked her coat, but she stood as tall as any monarch. She met Elias's gaze without flinching. "I will not take them from the only parent they remember tonight," she said. But I will not leave them either. Elias felt the bond pulse, 3 small heartbeats and 1 great one, all tangled together like roots. The cubs looked between the 2 adults, eyes wide-eyed, trembling. Rain drummed harder, washing blood and ash into the dirt. Neither human nor queen moved. The night held its breath, waiting for the next word, the next choice, the next heartbeat that would decide everything. The cabin's front wall was gone, open to the night like a broken mouth, yet the hearth still burned. Achevel stepped over the threshold first, coat dripping, and every remaining claw guard outside snapped to attention so hard their armor creaked. Elias followed, shotgun lowered but not surrendered, the cubs pressed to his sides like living armor. Inside smelled of scorched pine, gun oil, and warm milk. The only furniture left intact was the heavy kitchen table. Achevel laid a slim silver rod on it. The device unfolded into a portable gene scanner. Its light bathed the room in cold blue. "Proof," she said simply. "Then we speak." Elias nodded once. He coaxed the cubs forward. They went reluctantly, claws clicking on the floorboards, tails low. Syrah kept glancing back at him as though afraid he might vanish if she blinked. The scanner hummed. 3 drops of blood, 1 from each cub's ear tip, and 1 from Achevel's thumb. The holoscreen bloomed with spiraling helixes. The match was immediate and absolute. Maternal concordance 99.97%. The missing 0.03% was human. Achevel's breath caught. They added Terran sequences. Compatibility grafting. My children were to be bridges. The last word cracked like ice. Elias felt the cubs shiver. He rested a hand on Kale's head, frost melted beneath his palm. Bridges or weapons? Doesn't matter. They're children. The queen looked at him fully then, amber eyes ancient with grief and something newer, curiosity, maybe even respect. You carried them out of fire. You fed them when their own kind abandoned them. In Lyran law that makes you hearth. Translate. Earth Mother gives blood and bone. Heart Mother gives safety and name. Both are sacred. Both are irrevocable. She touched the faint scar on Kale's forehead where the royal crest had blazed earlier. The bond split. They have 2 mothers now. Removing one would kill the cubs. Silence rang louder than gunfire. Syrah broke it. She padded to Achevel, rose on hind legs, and placed both paws on the queen's knee. "You smell like stars," she said in wondering Lyran. Then, switching to trade, "But Papa smells like home." Achevel's ears trembled. She cupped Syrah's small face with infinite care. "I would know both scents," she whispered. Lyra circled the table, studying the queen the way she studied everything, measuring angles, exits, truth. "If we go with you, does Papa come too?" "He must," Achevel answered before Elias could. "The bond demands proximity until they are fledged. Separation longer than a cycle would cause neural collapse." Elias felt the room tilt. "You're saying I don't have a choice." "I am saying none of us do." The queen straightened, regal again despite the mud. "Come to Lyra's prime. All 4 of you. Under my seal and my protection. The children will learn who they are. You will stand at their side as hearth, with rank and honor. Refuse," she let the word hang, heavy with unspoken fleets and armies. The cubs looked at Elias. 6 eyes, gold, ice blue, pleading in perfect unison. He thought of running. He had done it before, ghosted across 3 sectors with nothing but a rifle and spite. But the cubs were no longer small enough to hide in a jacket. And the bond, he felt it now, a warm, terrifying tether braided around his heart, would drag them all into agony if he tried. Kale walked to him, took his hand with deliberate gravity, and placed it against Achevel's. The queen's palm was calloused from sword and scepter both. His was scarred from shrapnel and cradle boards. Between them, 3 small bodies pressed close. Achevel spoke first, voice steady. "I offer guest right, blood oath, and co-guardianship. Will you accept?" Elias looked down at the cubs. Syrah had already started purring. The vibration traveled through all 5 of them like a promise. He exhaled a decade of war and loneliness. "Yeah," he said. But the first time someone tries to put them in a cage, royal or otherwise, we're gone. And I won't be polite about it. Ashavel's ears flicked in what might have been amusement. Noted, hearth. Outside, the rain eased to a gentle mist. The claw guard parted as Elias stepped onto what remained of his porch, cubs clinging to his legs, the Queen Regent at his shoulder. Dawn bled pale gold across the ridge, catching on frost and embers alike. Somewhere above, the Starclaw opened its hangar doors like a mouth ready to swallow them whole. Elias looked at the cubs, then at the sky, and took the first step toward whatever came next. 6 months later, the crystal corridors of the Lyran Palace rang with the slap of bare feet and the deeper thud of marine boots. Elias Thorne walked them every day at the same hour, 3 half-grown cubs orbiting him like bright moons. Syrah bounded ahead, tail high, practicing the gliding prowl the swordmistress had drilled into her. Lyra stalked along the balustrade above, pretending she was invisible. She almost was. Kale patted at Elias's left hand, quiet, silver fur catching the light of floating glow orbs until he looked carved from starlight. They had grown again. Shoulders now level with his ribcage, limbs long and lethal, voices sliding between adolescent growl and childhood chirp. Palace staff still flinched when the trio passed, then smiled despite themselves, because the way people smile at thunderstorms wearing kitten faces. Elias wore the new uniform without complaint, midnight Lyran silk under old Terran armor plates, rank tabs that read Hearth Guardian in both scripts. The first tailor who tried to remove his faded marine insignia had nearly lost a finger to Syrah. The second tailor learned to work around it. Tonight the grand hall glittered for a state dinner, human and Lyran delegations pretending centuries of blood could be washed away with wine and speeches. Chandeliers of living ice drifted overhead, tables groaned beneath roasted leviathan and spiced cream. Diplomats in stiff collars argued clauses while trying not to stare at the half-wild royal cubs weaving between their legs. Ashavel occupied the high dais, regal in silver and starlight, eyes tracking her children with the same fierce tenderness she had worn the night she knelt in Elias's mud. When the human ambassador droned on about mining rights, her gaze flicked to Elias, a silent plea for patience. He answered with the smallest lift of one brow, "I've sat through worse briefings." Then the music changed. A bright, bouncing rhythm, half Lyran harp, half human fiddle, spilled from the gallery. Syrah's ears shot up. She spun, grabbed Lyra by the wrist, and bolted straight for Elias. "Papa! Dance!" Before he could protest, 6 small but strong hands hauled him into the center of the hall. Kale followed willingly, tail curling in anticipation. The cubs had invented the dance themselves, Lyran grace mixed with human stomp, spins that ended in playful pounces, leaps timed to the heartbeat of both species. They dragged Elias through it without mercy. He gave up resisting on the third turn. Boots thudded, silk flared, laughter, his own, startled out of him, rang off crystal walls. Syrah climbed his back mid-spin and rode his shoulders like a triumphant banner. Lyra twirled under his arm, tail flicking his cheek. Kale caught his hand and pulled him into a low, formal bow that dissolved into a tumbling heap of limbs and delighted roars. The delegations forgot their speeches. Some clapped. A few grizzled admirals wiped suspiciously damp eyes. From the dais, Ashavel watched. The stern mask she wore for courts and councils slipped entirely. For one unguarded moment she was only a mother seeing her children fearless and whole. When Syrah waved imperiously for her to join, the Queen Regent actually laughed, a low velvet sound that silenced the hall more effectively than any gavel. She descended the steps. The crowd parted like water. Ashavel took Elias's offered hand without hesitation, claws sheathed, and allowed her daughter to place her other palm in Kale's smaller one. The 5 of them formed a rough circle in the middle of the floor, human soldier, Lyran queen, 3 impossible cubs, and danced. Not perfectly. Elbows collided. Someone stepped on a tail. Lyra's joyful sonic chirp cracked 3 crystal goblets. None of it mattered. When the music finally staggered to a halt, the hall erupted. Cheers in 2 languages rolled like thunder. Elias found himself nose to nose with Ashavel, Both of them breathing hard, cubs piled against their legs in a warm, purring heap. "Thank you," she said quietly, so only he heard, for giving them back laughter instead of cages. He shrugged, awkward under the weight of her gratitude and the cubs' combined stare. "They taught me. I just followed." Kale looked up at both adults, solemn. "We have two mothers," he announced to the entire hall, loud enough that the translators stuttered. "One who found us in fire. One who carried us out of it. We are twice blessed." Ashavel's ears flicked. Her eyes shone suspiciously bright. Later, when the moons rose triple over the palace gardens, Elias stood on a balcony with the cubs sprawled across him like living blankets. Syrah's head rested on his thigh, Lyra's tail draped over his boots, Kale's slow heartbeat thudded against his ribs. Far below, diplomats still argued, but up here the night smelled only of night-blooming starvine and warm fur. Elias threaded fingers through silver and gold. "I came home from war with nothing," he said to the stars, voice rough with wonder. "Turns out the galaxy gave me a pride instead." Syrah purred, a rumble that shook them all. "Ours," she mumbled sleepily. "Forever," Lyra added, already half dreaming. Kale pressed his cold nose to Elias's jaw, the same gesture he had used the night they met, and whispered the first Lyran word Elias had ever learned from them. "Mine." Above them, the moons sailed on, serene and ancient. Somewhere inside, Ashavel felt the bond settle, 5 hearts beating in perfect, impossible harmony, and allowed herself the first unshadowed smile in years. The war was not over. Borders still bled. Old hatreds still smoldered. But tonight, in the heart of an empire that had once sworn to hate everything human, a soldier stood wrapped in royal cubs and considered himself the richest man alive. And tomorrow could come when it came.